The sting of the fluorescent lights in the hotel bar was nothing compared to the sight of Brenda's hand resting on someone else's arm, her laugh too bright, too free. My breath hitched. He caught my eye across the room, a flicker of something cold in his gaze, and then he pulled her closer, his smile thin and arrogant, a silent claim. The glass of bourbon sat on the oak coffee table, untouched. Its amber surface reflected the dim glow from the corner lamp, a small, still pool in the quiet house. Outside, a late October wind rustled the dry leaves against the windows, a sound like a whisper. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked with insistent regularity, each swing of the pendulum marking the slow bleed of time. It was well past midnight. Brenda had said she would be home by 9, 10 at the latest. Just a few work drinks, she had called it, her voice airy over the phone around 5. That was hours ago. Her late nights had become more frequent over the past few months. Small shifts at first, then larger ones, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface of their quiet life. I had learned to ignore the growing knot in my stomach, or tried to, dismissing it as old habits and anxieties from my own past. Her laughter in that bar came back to me, too loud, too free in the way her hand had rested on that man's arm. It had felt like a punch, seeing it, and then leaving without a word, driving home through the unfamiliar city streets until the familiar Midwest landscape unfolded around me. Lately she had been distant, her eyes often somewhere else when I spoke, a subtle barrier rising between us. Dinners were quieter, our conversations held an edge of something unsaid. I told myself it was work stress, the new project taking its toll, but the unease had rooted itself deep. The digital clock on the cable box flipped to 2:17 a.m. Just then, a faint creak from the front door sliced through the silence. My head snapped toward the sound. Footsteps, heavy and uneven, shuffled across the entry tile. Brenda. She appeared in the living room doorway, framed by the faint hall light, a ghost in her own house. She was barefoot, her blonde hair matted and tangled, falling over one side of her face. A dark beige trench coat, one she hadn't worn in years, was clutched tight around her. The fabric pulled so taut I knew she wore nothing underneath. Her eyes, wide and bloodshot, scanned the room before landing on me. There were dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks, like tear tracks in the pale moonlight. My gaze dropped to her collarbone, just visible where the coat gapped slightly. A dark splotch was blooming there, purplish against her fair skin, a bruise still fresh and angry. It seemed to pulse in the dim light. She saw me looking and instinctively pulled the coat tighter, trying to cover it. "Frank," she whispered, her voice raw, catching in her throat. Her eyes darted around the room again, as if searching for an escape. "Don't go into the shed." The words hung in the air, a physical thing. My world, which had been slowly tilting, now spun on its axis and crashed. The quiet house, the bourbon, the ticking clock, all of it instantly became irrelevant. The normalcy I'd been clinging to shattered into a million sharp pieces. Every suppressed suspicion, every ignored gut feeling erupted into a cold, hard certainty. She didn't wait for a response. Turning abruptly, she fled down the hall, the quiet thud of her bare feet fading as she reached the master bathroom. I heard the click of the lock, then the sudden rush of water as the shower came on. Loud and steady, a deliberate curtain drawn between us. The sound seemed to mock the fragile peace of the house. My mind raced, fragments of events crashing together. Her lateness, the other man, her distant gaze, the bruise, the trench coat, and then her words, "Don't go into the shed." Why the shed? It was where I kept my tools, the old lawnmower, the fishing gear from years ago. A dark, dusty place at the back of the property, rarely used, rarely thought of. But she knew me. She knew how my mind worked. She knew that by telling me not to go there, she was practically guaranteeing that I would. It was a challenge, a plea, a warning, all rolled into one desperate breath. The shed. My eyes drifted toward the back door, toward the small rectangle of darkness beyond the kitchen window. My hand reached for the familiar weight of the aluminum baseball bat leaning against the wall beside the back door. It was an old one, a gift from my father when I was a kid, chipped paint near the grip. I gripped it tight, the metal cold and solid in my palm. The back door opened with a slight squeak, letting in the cool, crisp night air, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The porch light cast a pale circle onto the dew-kissed grass. I stepped out, the bat held low at my side. The cold air bit at my exposed hands as I crossed the lawn, the dew-kissed grass crunching softly under my shoes. The baseball bat, solid and familiar, felt heavy and strange in my grip. Each step brought me closer to the small, windowless structure at the back of our property, the workshop I'd built myself 5 years ago. It had been a place of sawdust and quiet projects, of escape. Now it felt like a destination I never wanted to reach. The motion sensor light above the workshop door flickered, then bathed the area in a harsh, sudden white. My shadow stretched long and distorted before me. The air smelled of damp earth and the lingering scent of autumn leaves. I stopped at the keypad beside the door, my thumb punching in the familiar code. My birthday, a date Brenda used to remember without fail. The lock clicked, a sharp, metallic sound in the night. I pushed the heavy, insulated door inward, the hinges groaning softly. Inside, the workshop looked exactly as I had left it. Tools hung on pegboards, glinting under the single fluorescent tube light. Sawdust coated the workbench, and a half-finished birdhouse sat on a sawhorse, its unpainted wood smelling faintly of pine. The air was still and cool, carrying the familiar scent of oil and wood glue. For a moment, a sliver of doubt, of hope, tried to push its way in. Perhaps Brenda had been incoherent, disoriented. Perhaps nothing was here. Then a low, guttural grunt. It was muffled, indistinct, but undeniably human. It came from behind the tall metal storage cabinets that lined the far wall, where I kept paints and solvents. A rustling sound followed, like fabric dragging across concrete, quickly stifled. The air in my lungs tightened. I raised the bat slowly, the metal feeling colder now, heavier. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a dull drumbeat in the sudden, overwhelming silence. Each step I took was deliberate, measured, the soles of my shoes whispering on the concrete floor. The light cast long, shifting shadows as I inched around the corner of the cabinets. The bat held high, ready, and there he was. Todd Henderson, Brenda's colleague. He lay on the cold concrete floor, bound at the wrists and ankles with thick gray duct tape, his mouth covered by another strip. His suit jacket and pants were in a crumpled heap beside him, along with his expensive leather shoes. He was wearing only a pair of dark blue boxer briefs. His eyes, wide with sheer, unadulterated panic, stared up at me, reflecting the harsh fluorescent light. His usually slicked back brown hair was disheveled, falling into his eyes. A thin line of sweat beaded on his forehead. My brain struggled to make sense of the image. Todd Henderson, the man from the fifth floor, the one who always wore tailored suits and spoke with polite, practiced confidence. The man Brenda said was a bit full of himself, but good at his job. This wasn't that man. This was a trapped animal, stripped of all pretense, all dignity. The sheer absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. A dark, bitter sound that would have had no humor. I knelt, the bat still clutched in my hand, and yanked the duct tape from his mouth. It came off with a sickening tearing sound, leaving a red mark on his skin. Todd gasped, a raw, desperate sound, sucking in a shuddering breath. "Thank God," he choked out, his voice hoarse, his eyes darting frantically. "Thank God you're here. She went crazy, Frank. She just went crazy." His words spilled out in a torrent, incoherent at first, then coalescing into fragments of a story. A party, work thing, too many drinks. She said it was a joke, locked me in, thought she'd come back. She said she just needed to teach me a lesson. He tried to sit up, then winced as the tape bit into his skin. "I just needed to use the bathroom. We were talking." She just snapped. His eyes pleaded with me, a practiced look of innocence now undercut by genuine terror. He was trying to craft a narrative, to paint himself as a victim, but the details were too thin, too quick. My gaze fell to his bare chest, the faint red marks on his shoulders. My voice, when I spoke, surprised even me with its flatness, its absolute lack of emotion. It was the calm before the storm, the quiet that precedes a breaking. "How long has this been going on, Todd? You and Brenda?" Todd flinched, his eyes losing their frantic plea and hardening with a flicker of something calculating. He opened his mouth to respond, a fresh lie already forming, when the workshop door banged open again. The sound cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. Brenda stood in the doorway, her hair still damp from the shower, clinging to her forehead. She had changed into a pair of gray sweatpants and an old college sweatshirt, the kind she wore when she was sick or just wanted to disappear. Her face, still pale, drained completely of color as her eyes landed on Todd, then on me. The bat, the scene. She took an involuntary step back as if struck. "I told you not to come out here," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a desperate, broken plea. I turned from Todd, my gaze cold and unwavering, to Brenda. The harsh fluorescent light of the workshop seemed to bleach the color from her face, making her look stark and fragile. "Funny how that works, doesn't it?" I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet each word felt like a shard of ice. "Telling me not to do the very thing you knew I would." Todd, still bound on the floor, seized the opportunity. "Brenda, tell him! About Dusty and the party!" he blurted out, his voice a desperate plea. He looked at her, then back at me, as if expecting her to confirm some alternate reality. "Dusty?" I asked, my eyebrow raising slightly. My eyes flickered back to Brenda. Another piece of the puzzle, another name. My mind was already filling in the gaps, creating a picture I didn't want to see. Brenda remained frozen, a statue of defeat. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, her eyes wide and fixed on Todd, then on me. There was no denial, no attempt to explain. The scene before them, today, half naked and bound, me holding a baseball bat, was too stark, too undeniable. The air thrummed with unspoken accusations. Without breaking eye contact with Brenda, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, a small rectangle of blue light in the dim workshop. I raised it, aiming the camera at Todd Henderson, still sprawled on the concrete floor, his eyes darting frantically. The action was deliberate, mechanical. "Frank, no!" Brenda lunged forward, a desperate cry tearing from her throat. "Don't, please." She reached for my arm, her hand gripping my sweatshirt sleeve, but I sidestepped her easily, my movements precise, accustomed to a different kind of confrontation. Her hand slipped away, and she stumbled, catching herself on the workbench. The camera flashed, a brief, blinding white light. It froze Todd in a moment of utter humiliation, his eyes squeezed shut against the sudden glare, his mouth open in a silent scream. "Dude, stop!" Todd yelled, squirming against his bonds, his voice high-pitched with outrage. I lowered the phone, the digital image already stored, undeniable evidence. My gaze swept over them both, settling on Brenda. "There's nothing funny about this, Brenda," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion she probably expected. "Not a damn thing." Her shoulders slumped. The last vestiges of her defiance, her attempt at control, crumbled. She looked down at her feet, the wet strands of hair still clinging to her forehead. "It's complicated," she finally mumbled, the words barely audible. "Complicated?" I echoed, the acid returning to my voice. "You want to tell me how tying a man up in our shed, half naked, is complicated?" "I want the truth, Brenda, the raw, ugly truth. No more excuses. Not tonight." The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent light and Todd's ragged breathing. Brenda finally lifted her head, her eyes rimmed red. A dam broke. We've been seeing each other," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush, a desperate confession. "For a few months, since the project started. I know, Frank, I know it's wrong." She tried to explain, to rationalize. "You've been so preoccupied with work, with the house. I felt lonely." He was there. He listened. Her voice trailed off, the excuses thin and transparent, even to her own ears. The words rang hollow, clanging against the reality of Todd bound on the floor. My gaze settled on Todd again. He watched us, his eyes still wide, a mixture of fear and something else I couldn't quite decipher. My mind was clear, focused. I knelt beside him, ignoring Brenda, and slowly, deliberately, began to untie the duct tape from his wrists. The adhesive peeled away with a series of sharp, tearing sounds, the tape leaving angry red welts on his skin. He rubbed his wrists, wincing, but didn't speak. Then I moved to his ankles, methodically freeing him. He sat up, pushing himself back against the cabinets, pulling his knees to his chest, trying to make himself small. I stood, turning back to Brenda. My voice was calm, steady, and held no room for argument. "Pack a bag, Brenda," I said, the words echoing in the small space. "I need you out of here tonight." Brenda stood in the living room, a small overnight bag clutched in her hand, her face stained with tears. She didn't look at me. The house, usually a comfort, now felt vast and empty, the silence deafening after the raw confessions in the shed. She opened the front door, the hinges groaning faintly, and stepped out into the pre-dawn chill without another word. The click of the lock as she pulled the door shut was a definitive final sound. I heard her car start, the engine rumbling softly down the drive, then fading into the quiet of the street. I sat on the edge of the sofa, the bourbon glass still on the coffee table, a forgotten sentinel. The weight of Brenda's confession, the stark admission of betrayal, settled over me like a shroud. The air felt heavy, stale with unspoken truths. Now, with the distance of her departure, the little things began to surface, sharp and clear. The late nights that had become routine, always accompanied by an excuse of deadlines or team dinners. When the way she'd started taking her phone into the bathroom, claiming privacy, but I now remembered the subtle shift in her thumb movements, a new password I hadn't seen. Her increasing exhaustion, her lack of interest in the quiet evenings we once shared. All the little signs I had dismissed, rationalized, pushed down, now rose up like specters, each one a testament to my blindness. Our life, I realized, had been a meticulously constructed lie for months. Every shared meal, every casual touch, every quiet morning coffee had been built on a foundation of deceit. The thought was a physical ache in my chest, a hollowness that threatened to consume me. Her desperate, garbled story about the joke in the shed began to make a twisted kind of sense now. Her attempt to control Todd, to keep him quiet, to prevent the exposure of their affair. It was an act of desperation, a last-ditch effort to preserve her secret, and perhaps her life with me. The joke was a flimsy cover for something far more sinister. A frantic dance on the edge of exposure, and Dusty, the name Todd had blurted out. Another person knew, another threat to her carefully woven deception. Had Dusty been a confidant, a witness, or another participant in the sordid drama? The possibilities unspooled in my mind, each one uglier than the last. A profound sense of foolishness washed over me. I had trusted her implicitly, built my world around her, believed in the sanctity of our vows. The trust I had placed so blindly now felt like a gaping wound. How could I have been so naive, so unwilling to see what was right in front of me? I began to question everything. Our shared memories, once precious, now felt tainted, viewed through the lens of her betrayal. Had any of it been real? Our future, once a clear path stretching out before us, now vanished into an uncertain, terrifying void. The very foundation of our existence together, the quiet assumption of loyalty and love, had shattered. My gaze drifted around the living room to the framed photos on the mantel, the carefully chosen furniture, the books on the shelves. This was our home, the life we had built, the suburban colonial, the white picket fence. All of it felt tainted, coated in the residue of her lies. The startup I had poured my life into, the hours I'd spent building something stable for our future, now seemed like a cruel irony. The practicalities began to gnaw at me. The mortgage, the shared accounts, the legal complexities of disentangling a life so thoroughly intertwined. The raw anger that had propelled me through the night slowly began to ebb, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. It was the sadness of something beautiful, something I believed in, irrevocably broken. A grief for a future that would never be, for a trust that could not be rebuilt. But beneath the sadness, a cold resolve began to harden. I couldn't let this go. Not now. Not after everything. There had to be consequences. There had to be a reckoning. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a shattered life, and the people who had done the shattering needed to face the fallout. The days that followed Brenda's departure blurred into a desolate, quiet stretch of time. The house, once a home, now echoed with its emptiness. Food held no appeal. Sleep came in short, fitful bursts, punctuated by the relentless replay of that night in the shed. The quiet hum of the refrigerator felt like a mocking presence in the otherwise silent rooms. It wasn't long before the whispers started. Our professional community in this town was small, interconnected, like threads in a tightly woven fabric. News, especially bad news, traveled fast. I heard it in the strained pauses during calls, in the overly sympathetic tones of colleagues, in the way conversations abruptly shifted when I walked into a room. The details were murky at first, just vague rumors of trouble and personal issues, but the undercurrent of scandal was undeniable. I hadn't explicitly said anything, but the photos on my phone were a quiet form of leverage. A carefully placed, anonymous email to a few key figures at Westbrook Consulting, Todd's employer, with a cryptic attachment, proved to be enough. I didn't have to spell it out. The image spoke for itself, an undeniable blot on a man's professional reputation. Word eventually filtered back to me. Todd Henderson was facing a serious internal investigation. His career, I knew, was as good as over. The fallout was swift and public. Todd's wife, Nancy, a woman I barely knew but recognized from community events, learned of the affair. Her reaction, I was told by a mutual acquaintance, was nothing short of explosive. There was a scene at the Westbrook offices, a shouting match that spilled into the lobby, Nancy's furious accusations ringing through the polished halls. The story quickly became legend, passed around with hushed tones and a morbid fascination. Brenda, too, suffered the consequences. Within a week, she lost her job at Westbrook Consulting. Her career, one she had meticulously built over a decade, was abruptly derailed. The industry was small, her reputation now irrevocably stained. No one would touch her, not with this kind of baggage. I endured the pitying glances, the awkward silences from friends and colleagues who didn't quite know what to say. Some offered condolences, others tried to change the subject, their discomfort palpable. It was a strange, isolating experience to be the subject of such scrutiny, even if unspoken. My own startup, the one I had poured my life into, suffered. My profound distraction was evident in my work, in the lack of focus, the missed details. The cloud of scandal that hung over my personal life inevitably drifted into my professional one, dulling the edge of my ambition, eroding my drive. Brenda tried to contact me repeatedly. Texts piled up on my phone, desperate pleas, apologies, attempts to explain. She called from unknown numbers, leaving voicemails filled with a raw, broken quality, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Each attempt felt like another invasion, another demand on a part of myself I no longer had to give. The thought of hearing her voice, of facing her again, was unbearable. Then a letter arrived, a thick envelope, handwritten, Brenda's familiar looping script on the front. I opened it with a strange mix of dread and morbid curiosity. It was a long, rambling apology, filled with remorse and despair. She detailed her regret, her shame, how lost she felt. She spoke of loneliness, of mistakes, of a desire for forgiveness I didn't know how to grant. The words were heavy, but they landed on a heart that felt like stone. I began to research divorce lawyers, the legal jargon cold and clinical, a stark contrast to the emotional wreckage of my life. It was a grim process, steeling myself for the inevitable legal battles, the financial unraveling, the public dissection of our failed marriage. The shame, I realized, wasn't just Brenda's or Todd's. It was a shared burden, a public spectacle that tainted us all. This was the cost of deceit, the ripple effect of betrayal, a lesson learned the hardest way possible. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The lawyer's office was sterile, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Mr. Davies, a man with thin gray hair and an equally thin smile, laid out the legal intricacies of divorce, his voice even and dispassionate. We discussed the impact of infidelity on asset division, the nuances of fault in a no-fault state. He spoke of leverage, of protecting my interests, of the cold, hard facts of property and finances. My mind drifted, grappling with the internal struggle between the desire for cold revenge and the simpler, perhaps purer goal of fair restitution for what had been taken. Was I seeking justice or merely inflicting pain? The line felt blurred, indistinct. Brenda, I knew, was facing the harsh realities of her choices. Financially vulnerable, without a buy, and socially ostracized from a community that had once welcomed her, she was experiencing a solitude she had likely never known. I heard snippets of her situation from mutual acquaintances, vague mentions of her staying with her sister in a small apartment, struggling to find work. Her world, once comfortable and secure, had shrunk to a fraction of its former size. Todd Henderson's life, too, was in shambles. His career was effectively over, his reputation ruined. I heard his wife, Nancy, had filed for divorce, taking their children and most of their shared assets. He had vanished from the local scene, a cautionary tale whispered in office hallways. The public shaming had been thorough, devastating for both of them. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, a chilling question would prick at me. Had I gone too far? Was the wreckage I had helped create too absolute, too cruel? The immediate visceral satisfaction of inflicting consequence had begun to curdle, leaving a bitter aftertaste. I had wanted them to feel the pain, to understand the gravity of their actions. But now, seeing the extent of the destruction, I wondered if the price had become too high, even for me. I drove out to rural Illinois to visit my aging parents, seeking some comfort, some grounding. The familiar landscape of cornfields and quiet towns was a balm, a temporary escape from the suffocating air of my own life. They didn't ask many questions, just offered quiet, knowing nods. My father, a man of few words, put a hand on my shoulder as I was leaving. My mother, ever practical, baked me a pie and reminded me, in her gentle Midwestern way, of the enduring cost of unkindness. "Frank," she said, her voice soft but firm, "what good does it do to watch someone else drown? It just pulls you down with them." Her words stayed with me, a small, persistent voice in the back of my mind. A few days later, Brenda's sister called. Her voice was strained, thick with worry. "Frank," she pleaded, "you need to talk to her. She's not doing well. She's completely isolated. She made a mistake, a big one, but she's still Brenda. She needs to hear from you." The call left me uneasy, stirring a complicated mix of emotions I wasn't ready to untangle. A hollow satisfaction mingled with a pervasive sorrow. The knowledge that everyone paid a price, that suffering was universal, didn't offer the comfort I once thought it would. Instead, it was a heavy burden. I had sought justice or something like it, and had found only a desolate landscape where no one truly won. The affair, I began to see, wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was something deeper, a desperate act by Brenda herself. A reaching out, perhaps misguided, for something she felt was missing, something she couldn't articulate. Her life had imploded, and I, in my pursuit of consequence, had been a significant part of that implosion. The cold comfort of being right felt like ash in my mouth. The conference room felt colder than the lawyer's office, the air thick with unspoken words and legal jargon. Brenda sat across from me, her lawyer beside her face thinner, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Our own lawyers did most of the talking, their voices formal, detailing the final terms of the divorce settlement. It was the last time we would be in a room together like this, a cold, clinical end to years of shared history. She finally spoke, her voice a low murmur. "Frank," she began, her gaze meeting mine, "I'm truly sorry for everything, for my selfishness, for the pain I caused you. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it." Tears welled in her eyes, genuine and raw. I looked at her, at the woman who had shared my life, my bed, my dreams. I acknowledged her remorse with a slight nod, a silent recognition of her brokenness. But the forgiveness she sought, the one that would truly set me free, simply wasn't there. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The trust had been too deep, the betrayal too profound. The papers were signed, a quiet scrape of pens on legal documents. It was done, Sham. A cold official end to what I had once thought was a perfect life, a neatly packaged American dream. I began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. Days blurred into weeks, then months, as I poured myself into my startup, finding a strange solace in the relentless demands of work. Life moved on, as it always does. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee in town, I saw Todd Henderson across the street. He looked older, his shoulders slumped, a visibly changed and diminished man. He didn't see me, and I felt nothing but a quiet recognition of consequence. The whispers and gossip in our small town, potent as they were for a time, eventually faded, replaced by newer scandals, fresh dramas. Life, for everyone else, returned to a semblance of normal. But for me, the quiet, persistent ache remained, an indelible scar etched deep by betrayal and disillusionment. I put the house on the market, the suburban colonial that had once symbolized everything I believed in. It felt like an empty shell, a monument to a life that had shattered. When it sold, I moved to a smaller place, somewhere simpler, a fresh start unburdened by ghosts. The shed, once my sanctuary, stood empty, its door now permanently locked, a silent, concrete monument to the night everything I knew fell apart. The quiet hum of the new apartment offered no grand answers, just a different kind of silence. The divorce was a fact, a line in a court document, cold and clean. Life had rearranged itself, slowly, painfully, into a shape I hadn't foreseen. The house, that emblem of a certain kind of promise, now belonged to someone else. Its white picket fence, once a symbol, became just wood and paint in memory. The ache wasn't always sharp, but it was always there, a phantom limb of a life severed. Brenda was gone, Todd was gone, and the public whispers had long since moved on. There was no victory, no satisfying resolution, only the quiet understanding that choices carry a weight, and that weight settles differently on everyone. The shed, out back of a property I no longer owned, stood as a monument to a single shattering night. It was just a building, but it held a truth that reshaped everything.